Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
The impact of the podcasts has been really instrumental in opening up the conversation, particularly with football fans around gambling and the impacts that gambling harms can have on anyone.
It's great. You just enjoy helping people, and we're trying to get people to the best version of themselves, and if it takes footballers to do that, then so be it. But I think it's been really, really powerful. And the figures speak for themselves.
To just see someone that they relate to, that they share similarities with, talking about similar problems, that can be a massive icebreaker. I think that's why these podcasts are so important.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday. The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. I hope you're well. Thank you so much for your time as we get ever closer to episode 300 of the podcast. It's never been a more important time to talk about our mental health, looking after each other and being aware of other people's surroundings. None more so than this week, where we've seen the footballer Dele Alli come out and talk about his traumatic experiences from childhood and the impact that that's having on his adult life, and about how we as maybe football fans or a society judged him before we knew, some judged him, before we knew the details of what he'd gone through. He's been able to find the time this week to be open about that, and actually it has echoes of what we heard around our Football Untold series, and I wanted to touch on that as part of this week's programme because, if you've seen the Dele Alli story, if you've listened to our Football Untold podcast, you will understand that when people talk about their experiences, you, of course, learn so much more about the situation they find themselves in and get a much greater understanding of what people are going through in their day-to-day lives. It's what Football Untold was all about. And I hope that Dele Alli, with his conversation with Gary Neville, will do a similar thing to open up these so-called taboo subjects, to give other people the words and the permissions, if you like, to have these conversations. And the reason I mentioned that this week is because we've had some absolutely incredible feedback from our sponsors of Football Untold, the Beacon Counselling Trust. Now, Beacon Counselling Trust provide support to people who come to them with gambling issues. Now, that might be when they've hit rock bottom, but it also might be when they are looking to get a little bit of advice about maybe things they need to look out for, or they want to get some training around spotting signs in other people, or they might just want to be aware of what's there for them if things go wrong. They do some fantastic work, and it was great to partner with them for the Football Untold series. Now, since Football Untold was launched, Beacon Counselling Trust has seen a 200% increase in the number of people coming to them for what they call brief interventions. Now, those brief interventions can be a whole range of different things, but essentially a 200% increase there. But essentially, it's a 200% increase in people coming to them asking for support. Now, some might start counselling and therapy services. Some might be signposted to other services. Some might be given other advice around how they can keep maybe their current gambling in check, or warning signs maybe if things are getting a little bit out of control. So that's great work from them, but also fantastic that the conversations that we've had with Football Untold have encouraged people to reach out for support and to get that advice. And the team at Beacon Counselling Trust, they're still crunching the numbers because of the way these systems work, but they say that that number is in the hundreds of people who've looked for support and sought support as a result of hearing these conversations on Football Untold. Now, you can only imagine how proud we feel that that is the case. Of course, it's sad that there's that many people who need the support, but we're delighted that the people who are out there who potentially need that support have felt empowered to go and get that support. So we're really, really pleased with that. And that result, if you like, and, they say football is a results-based business. And the lads, I've spoken to them individually, are all absolutely over the moon with that. I'm really pleased that people have found that connection. So on this week's podcast, we're going to be hearing from Lauren Campbell from Beacon Counselling Trust, who sets out essentially what that impact is, what that looks like, what support those people will be getting, and about how this conversation becoming normalised will help other people in the future. Off the back of that, we'll hear from Simon Howarth, who I caught up with just yesterday, actually, to break the news to him that we'd had this impact, and that people like his story had this impact as well. So you'll hear from Si as well at the end of the podcast. So Mental Health Monday, hopefully making a difference. Don't forget, you can check out the Football Untold podcast via footballuntold.co.uk. That's footballuntold.co.uk. There's 6 episodes of that to listen to, and as we'll hear now from Lauren, it's made a difference.
You know, we understand the real links between football, sport and gambling, and just how kind of, I suppose, entrenched gambling really is in the culture of football especially. So we see that a lot, so we knew that would really kind of resonate with people.
It was interesting doing it from the footballer's point of view, because of course most of us see it from the punter's point of view, don't we? And actually to get an insight into the fact that those guys had similar experiences in similar environments, you know, going to the bookmakers, roulette machines on their phones, that actually it kind of shows that footballers are real people.
It does. It humanizes them, and I think it sheds a light on the fact that you know, gambling harms can impact anybody. It does not matter, you know, what your economic background is, your culture, you know, where you come from. You know, it can really impact any type of person.
In terms of the results of people seeking out support as a result of the podcast, the numbers are really positive in a way that people coming forward is always good news, right? It's probably fair to say. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think since the podcasts were released, so for the past few months, we've definitely seen an increase in, well, first of all, the amount of people reaching out for our training and education programs. So at Beacon, we offer different kinds of training, so for young people and for professionals working with young people around gambling harms. But we also run a level 2 course called Bet You Can Help. We've seen a lot more people inquiring about that. So that really just helps people to understand what gambling harms are, what support is available, how to signpost and refer. The past few months, we've also seen a big increase in people accessing Beacon for brief interventions as well. So when we talk about brief interventions, it's a really short or, you know, meaningful conversation that we have with people. So 10 to 15 minutes, and just providing people, it's mainly for people who are more so at risk of being impacted by gambling. So providing people with just a bit more awareness around what gambling and gambling harms are, and providing people with some practical tools to stay safe if they want to continue gambling, but also to stop completely if they need to do that. So talking through things like self-exclusion, betting limits, you know, blocking software.
One of the things that we're really proud of in terms of those stats and those people coming forward is that was the intention, first and foremost, that people hopefully would heard it. But secondly, that they had the strength to then go, you know what, I will reach out for help here. You know, so many people must sit there thinking, what do I say? Like where do I, like, what's that first conversation? The fact that you guys have seen that uptake in people coming forward shows that people have felt, you know what, I need to have this conversation no matter what level they're at.
Yeah, that's a big thing for us, because, you know, a lot of the people that we see accessing our service have hit what they would call their rock bottom. So people who are really just in crisis and have got kind of no other options. So they turn to us then for support. And it's something that we're kind of really passionate about and are doing a lot more work in is the early intervention work and education, raising people's awareness within the general public, but also providing people with the right language and the confidence to actually access help and support at a much earlier stage to prevent gambling turning into an addiction or to be impacted by the harms that, you know, we've heard people talk about on the podcast.
That's one of the things that I found particularly interesting, the feedback that we've received, people saying like, oh, I'd never heard people talking about it that way before, or the way that certainly during the conversations, we weren't just talking about how much money did you lose. It was about how were you feeling when that happened, what things had gone on in your life. You know, the lads sharing really personal information about, you know, traumas that experienced in the past. So that was maybe for the first time that I realized that actually that idea around gambling addiction, I realized myself, it's not about just the thrill of the moment. It's almost a symptom of a much wider issue that someone's dealing with.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, we all assume that gambling can come just from a place of maybe people struggling with financial issues. But it is so much deeper than that. And, for a significant amount of people that access our treatment and support services, we see a lot of people that have experienced trauma within their lives. So gambling, as with any forms of addiction, drugs and alcohol, it can provide them with that coping mechanism, and it's that escapism from difficult things that they've been through or are still currently going through, with their mental health. So there's so many different reasons as to why somebody would kind of develop that harmful relationship with gambling.
Now, you guys are sort of experts, so you know all the right questions to ask, but I wonder whether or not some people may be listening to conversations or similar conversations to Football Untold, maybe only really clock in their own mind they've got an issue when they hear someone talk about their other issue. Do you see the point I'm trying to make there? That actually it almost takes sometimes hearing somebody else say, I had a problem, or I have a problem, for them to go, oh, that sounds like me, that actually.
Absolutely. I mean, we all have our own blind spots, don't we, when it comes to our own behaviours and our own kind of thought processes. But, one thing that we can't ignore as well is just how normalised gambling is, as well as gambling harms. Especially within the spaces like with football fans, people are at matches. And so it's difficult for people to recognise within themselves that they're actually struggling with gambling, never mind for other people around them to recognise it. So to hear real life stories, I think can kind of open people's eyes, and they can really resonate with some of that stuff.
One of the things I'm really aware of when we talk about sort of issues around gambling, if you link it in with, like, say, smoking or drinking, that there are certain stop signs you can put in place with some of those things. If you don't have cigarettes, you don't buy cigarettes, or you've not got money for cigarettes, you're not getting cigarettes. You can avoid buying alcohol if that's at all possible. But actually, you talk about those, particularly men going to football matches where the club wears a sponsor, the stadium's potentially sponsored by it. There's potentially, kiosks in the stadiums. The match hoardings are there. The league itself might be sponsored by a betting company. What do you say to them about, like, look, because it is everywhere, isn't it? In the way that cigarette advertising maybe used to be, that's fallen away a little bit. Alcohol's pretty much everywhere, but gambling, particularly within those environments, must be a really almost impossible thing to avoid.
It is, absolutely, and it's evidence of just, again, how normalized it really is. People are exposed to it everywhere, and it's so difficult, when we speak to people who are, trying to access support and trying to achieve recovery, when everywhere that they turn, there's gambling adverts, there's, and all of the incentives and all of that kind of stuff, it's really difficult for people to escape that. But one thing we also see with people accessing support is a significant number of people have really had early exposure to gambling, and there's much more evidence coming out now to show the close relationship between early exposure to gambling and the likelihood to developing gambling harms as people get older. So even for young people going to the match, for example, and seeing the sponsorships and just seeing all of the gambling advertisements, whilst it may not directly harm them in that moment, it's kind of it's just there. It's in people's faces all the time.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure that's an issue we're going to have to come back to sort of time and time again. A couple of changes on the way, but we'll see how much of those have an impact. Can I show, and those people who came forward, you mentioned the brief interventions there, this sort of like opening conversation with people. What sort of things do you talk about in those sorts of moments? There might be someone thinking, I need to have one of these conversations. Can you just give us a sense of maybe what sort of questions you might ask, or how that conversation flows, if you like?
So it's really, first of all, just getting a feel for people's typical gambling behaviours. How much money are people spending? Are they spending more than they can afford to lose? and getting a feel for what are the impacts of that person's gambling. So has it harmed them, not just financially, but have they ever noticed it's had a negative impact on their emotional and mental health? Has it caused them stress and anxiety? Has it impacted on their relationships with family, friends, colleagues? Have other people criticised their gambling? You know, just asking those questions to get them to start really thinking a little bit more about the gambling. And sometimes what we find is, I mean, for some people, having that conversation is enough. They go away, they put some tools in place, and they feel okay about that. But what it can do for other people is open up a bit of a wider conversation about the gambling, and a significant number of people then end up accessing for more therapeutic support with us. So, you know, that one-to-one, more specialised therapy to look at, you know, how they can manage the gambling urges, understanding the triggers that lead them to gamble, and also helping them with the impacts, or what we would call the legacy harms of gambling. So, for example, even when somebody's in a place of recovery, the impacts that the gambling has had on relationships, the mental health, on everything around them, can go on for a long amount of time. So it's really important that people are supported with that stuff as well, not just to stop gambling.
I think that's really that sounds particularly interesting, given some of the stories that we heard and some of the sort of the comments from some of the lads about the wider conversations about dealing with gambling. Because I think it was Clark Carlisle talked about, you know, if you stop drinking, it's often you're the last person to realize that you need to stop drinking, because people around your family will recognize it, maybe wife, partner, whoever. But it was interesting, the moment you admit you've got a gambling problem might also have to be the moment that you tell a wife, partner, or the same person, a loved one, that you've lost significant sums of money, or that the financial security that they thought they had in their life no longer exists. That actually those difficult moments that might be sort of cheered and sort of cherished within other harms actually becomes a much more difficult moment, because it's when the reality of everything that's happened and is still happening has to be dealt with. And that's beyond, am I placing a bet today or not? That might be, how do I save my relationship? How do I regain trust with the people I care about most? How do I look at them? How do I look at myself in the mirror? Now that all of this stuff that I've been concealing in myself is out there and is not quite public knowledge, but knowledge within a group of people who you care for and care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes gambling different to other forms of addiction, because it really is that hidden addiction, you know, as people have spoken about on the podcast. So a lot of people that we speak to will go years and years without telling anyone about the gambling. And a lot of people talk about living that double life of acting like everything's okay in work and with the family, when on the inside they're carrying huge amounts of anxiety and stress and worry. But because it is easier to hide, you know, people can become quite good at convincing everybody around them that they're okay. And I think that's why we do see people accessing when they've hit that rock bottom, because it can be so much more difficult to tell other people, because they can't physically see that anything's going on.
It's interesting, that rock bottom phrase, but actually from the pathways that you've set out there, the different conversations you can have, it strikes me that it's so much easier to speak to somebody who is not at rock bottom, that the signposting, the damage isn't as deep, the adjustments can be more maybe subtle, if you like. I guess as part of that conversation of encouraging people to come forward before it gets to its worst. Maybe at that moment you think, oh, maybe there is an issue here. Maybe that conversation then puts you back on a more stable path.
Absolutely, and that's really what we encourage people to do. You know, we always pride ourselves that with Beacon, it's an open invite, the door is always open. And I think there's sometimes an assumption that, oh, well, it's not that bad, I don't need professional support because it's not gotten to that point. When actually, like you said, the sooner that you get the help and address those maybe the smaller harms that have been happening, the sooner you can just start to feel more in control of things again. You know, it's never too early to ask for that support.
No, absolutely. What would you say to the footballers that shared their stories with Football Untold for this first series, focusing on the harms of gambling?
I just think it's a massively brave thing to do. I think it's a brave thing for anybody to come out and talk about their experiences with gambling harms. Because, you know, as they've talked about, it still is so stigmatized. But, you know, there's a lot of people that will look up to them. And so the fact that they can be so open and vulnerable and raw about their stories, especially as men, and to talk about their own mental health struggles, is a massively brave thing to do. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have listened to their stories that can really resonate with that and say, okay, well, if they can come out and talk and ask for support, then why can't I?
I'm going to share that with them, by the way, in the little WhatsApp group we've got going on. I'm sure they'll be absolutely made up of that. And actually, that was the whole reason that they wanted to speak out. And I guess as well, it brings some of those conversations out into the open. We know that the gambling harm is out there. We you know, you can see financially the losses that we make every year, or the amount of money that gambling companies are able to make each and every year, and that money's coming from somewhere. It's coming from losing bets. So we know that these sort of stories are out there. Do you think there's something about normalizing these conversations so that if you do think, you know, I'm not having a good time with this, or this isn't working for me anymore, or maybe there's a problem here, normalizing the conversation also normalizes someone turning to them and going, well, have you heard about Beacon Counselling Trust? Or have you heard about this website? Have you heard about this thing you can do?
That's it. You know, it works both ways. It's not just normalizing the conversation so people can recognize things about their own behaviors more, but making other people feel more comfortable to say, you know what, if it's a friend, for example, they seem like they're struggling a little bit with the gambling, and asking, you know, is everything okay? Are you spending a little bit more than you would want to? Do you feel like you need a little bit of support? Do you want to talk about your gambling? Making people feel comfortable enough to ask those questions as well is so important. And I think sometimes the reason that people are reluctant to do that as well, whether that's on a personal level or as other professionals in supporting roles, is because if somebody does say, well, yeah, I am struggling with me gambling, they don't always know what the next steps are. So it's really about raising people's awareness that there is a lot of support out there. You just need to kind of know where it is, and making sure that people are aware that the services like Beacon that can offer that kind of free, confidential but specialist support, you know, for people struggling with gambling, and also any of the affected family members, friends, partners that are impacted as well.
Those people who have come forward as a result of hearing Football Untold will be on their own sort of pathway now. We talked about maybe some of the difficulties you've got to face when you're dealing with that. Can you paint a little picture, Lauren, of where those people might be in sort of like 4 weeks' time, in 6 months' time, in a year's time, if you like, when they've taken that step, they've faced the difficulties? You must see the feedback you get down the line from people who find themselves in a much better place.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's some really amazing feedback that we get from people. So typically the pathway will be that once people have finished that one-to-one therapeutic support and they're able to find themselves in a place of recovery, we offer a number of different aftercare support options. So people then go on and access peer support. So that's with other people with lived experience of gambling. And we have kind of weekly group support as well. So for people to also just meet other people that are going through something similar really helps them long term. But, you know, I think a lot of people, before they access the service, think that, oh, I don't know if anything is ever going to help me to stop gambling. You know, a lot of people really do believe that. So for them, it can be quite a shock to find that actually I've been able to stop gambling for a long amount of time now, and you know, they can kind of find meaning in the life again, and they've got that time back. You know, a lot of people that are in recovery talk to us about, you know, obviously the financial impact is massive and the money that you lose. But the thing we hear a lot is actually the biggest regret I've got is the amount of time I lost, the amount of time that I could have spent with friends, my partner, with my children. So to get to a place of recovery and have that time back is massive for people.
Yeah, and to get the time to reflect on that as well. Although you're reflecting on a negative, the fact that you're in the place where you can look back at that time and think, you know what, things need to change is really huge. It's interesting that you touched on. We talked about men and focusing on men. And that was one of the focuses of using footballers because it's the closest connection. Sometimes people use difficult to reach members of communities, or they have phrases like that. And sometimes difficult to reach, I sometimes think it's can't be bothered to reach, or don't have the imagination to be able to reach. I'd like to think that something like Football Untold shows that there are ways of making connections. Oh, you'll never convince a 40-year-old bloke he's got a problem because he's a 40-year-old bloke who thinks he knows it. But it just goes to show you can change people. You've just got to find the right way to have the conversation with someone.
Yeah, I don't like the phrase, hard to reach groups. Like you said, it's just, is it that you can't be bothered? Is it that actually the techniques that you use to reach other forms of groups, it just doesn't work for everyone, So for example, we do quite a lot of work within South Asian and Muslim communities, to educate them on gambling harms and support them. Now, the way that we would work within those communities will be different to other communities. It's really important that we have people within Beacon that belong to those communities, so that they can be culturally sensitive around the language being used. They understand kind of the nuances about people's attitudes towards gambling within those communities. So other people may class them as a hard to reach group, when actually no, we just need to kind of slightly change our approaches to how we support those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly, the whole process has inspired me to think, actually, there are different ways of having different conversations about a whole host of, mental health things, other issues as well, to engage with people. And that's what it's ultimately, I think, is about, isn't it? About finding something that's relatable and engaging. And I think people then go, oh yeah, this is talking to me.
And I think the biggest thing for anyone is to just see someone that they relate to, that they share similarities with, talking about similar problems. That can be a massive icebreaker. So, I think that's why these podcasts are so important, because you're seeing men at a certain age group, who come from a certain background, talking about gambling in that way. We know that men can struggle to open up and talk about their mental health. So to see other men doing it, especially men that they would look up to, I think can really help to break those barriers down. I think the impact of the podcasts has been really instrumental in opening up the conversation, particularly with men and with football fans, around gambling, the normalization of gambling and the wide range of impacts that gambling harms can have on anyone.
There we go. That's going on the poster, Lauren. Thank you so much for that. Laura, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thanks for telling us about, obviously, the interactions that we've had, obviously, as a result of Football Untold, but the ongoing work as well. For the Beacon Counselling Trust, if you type Beacon Counselling, it's the first thing that comes up, and then you can go onto the website as well. You're operating in sort of different parts of the country as well, so people will be able to hopefully find the connection with you.
Yeah. So we cover the whole of the Northwest for free gambling support. So yeah, people can Google Beacon Counselling Trust, or just give us a call on 0151 226 0696 to book in for support.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you for your time. Thanks for speaking to us on this week's edition of Mental Health Monday.
Thank you.
That's Lauren Campbell then from Beacon Counselling Trust joining me for Mental Health Monday. The Football Untold podcast you can watch on YouTube, and you can also find it on your podcast provider, wherever you get your podcast. Just type in Football Untold. Footballuntold.co.uk is the website. I mentioned at the start I'd spoken to the lads. We have a WhatsApp group. We drop voice notes in there. That's just the thing we do now, sometimes 2-3 minutes long. I have to listen to them in double speed. But what an absolutely brilliant set of lads they are, and we've actually got some more to come from them in October of this year, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as we get further into the year. I spoke to Simon Howarth, who was the original footballer that I spoke to about what Football Untold could be, based on him telling me his story. And Simon was really keen to get on board with the project and make it work. He's been a real driving force behind it as well, because he wants his story to be out there in the hope that it can make a difference. So I caught up with him to break the news to him that we'd had this impact, and that Football Untold had this impact with people coming forward to get support. Exactly the reason he wanted to share his story. And also to sort of talk about that relatability, particularly around that Dele Alli story, which broke in the last week or so, which in some ways resonated with his own story.
I think it's amazing. It's a hard thing to say you're really pleased about, because initially you don't want that problem. But the fact that people have come out and reached out and got help. And the idea of the podcast was to try and get people at the right stage of the addiction or the compulsion or the problem. So, I mean, they're mind-blowing sort of figures, which is really pleasing for us in what we're trying to do. So really pleased for that. Not, like I said, not pleased that many people have got a problem, but I think that's the only way forward with the gambling addiction is to try and get people early enough to realise there's something there that they need to go and talk about.
How does it make you feel knowing that you shared your story, your individual story, but then as a group with the rest of the lads as well, and people connected with it, or people heard something about your story that made them think, oh, you know what, that sounds like me?
It's a really good feeling, you know. That's what we set out to do when we sat down and had a coffee. That was our idea, Mick, that we had a platform, or we thought we had a platform as ex-footballers and current footballers, in Stephen's case, to go out and talk about what gambling looked like to us, what constituted a gambling addiction, and could we help people. And that's proof that people will listen to us and people will look up to us, if you like, and go and get help. And long may it continue. You know, I'm out most days now delivering gambling harm talks, and it's great. You just enjoy helping people, and you know, we're trying to get people to the best version of themselves, and if it takes footballers to do that, then so be it. But I think it's been really, really powerful. And the figures speak for themselves.
I mean, people obviously know you as an ex-footballer, but do people also now say, are you the bloke from the Football Untold podcast?
I get a bit of that, yeah. I think the majority, and we did the episode on stigma, and you know, I'd still like people to be a bit kinder with people making mistakes, and you know, that we still have that where someone can be cast aside for something. We've seen with the Dele Alli sort of interview yesterday. We've still got to be kinder and more understanding of people's problems. But yeah, I get more of that now. Oh, you were the guy with the gambling problem. But in general, people are kind of pleased, and people will say it's brave of you and you're doing good things. So in general, it's good. But I think as a society, we have to keep working on that. You know, that mindset that we've all got problems, we're all flawed, and we've all got traumas. Let's just try and be a bit kinder. The world will be a better place if we're all a bit kinder. So, yeah, I get that a lot more now, but generally it's good feedback.
I want to ask you about the Dele Alli situation. In the last sort of 24 hours, his story has emerged. Trauma from childhood, something that you touched on as part of your story as well. Addiction that fits into his story as well. The impact that has had on his sense of well-being. Of course, his footballing career at the same time. But moreover, a sense that there's always another story. That this idea that, you know, a footballer just doesn't fancy it. He's been described as lazy. You were described as lazy, but there was other things go. There must have been big parts of his story that resonated with your own.
Yeah, it was so powerful. It was good to see, and obviously he's on a higher level than me to tell his story. But you know, you could see the pain in his story, and it made a lot of sense now. I mean, I've watched his career like everyone else probably, and thought at times, is this boy okay, or what's going on? Thinking it might be injuries or something else, but it's obviously a mental issue. And yeah, I could relate to a lot of it, different backgrounds and different stories, if you like, and different traumas. But I think we all have trauma of sorts. And it's something that we all need to recognise and be aware of, and it's good that he's talked about it. And all addictions and all problems they're always a symptom, you know, whether it's sleeping pills like Dele, gambling for me, alcohol, drugs, it's always on the back of some trauma. And I think what we need to do as a society is understand that we are all flawed. We're all flawed. We all have problems, and like I said, and you know, it's about being kinder to each other and understanding. And next time, maybe people will be a little less judgmental on people with problems. And I've been guilty of it. It's human nature that you have that bias of judging people. But again, it comes back to the whole stigma, Mick, and educating people and losing that stigma. If someone's not performing, maybe there's something up, and maybe I shouldn't call him and I should say, is everything okay? So it's really powerful for footballers and people in general that we're all flawed. We all got problems. We all make mistakes. Don't cast people aside. See how they're doing. Bear with them and let people try and be better, you know. It's the same with Dele now. Hopefully he's going to go and be the best version of himself. But he always has to keep working on that. And the thing I notice as well in general with people is that lack of self-awareness, to think that it's them. It's always they've got a problem, I've not got a problem. And that's another thing we probably need to raise in ourselves as human beings, is a bit of self-awareness to think, I'm not perfect, I've made mistakes.
And one of the challenges that we've got with Football Untold, obviously we're creating a platform where people can talk about their stories, but then it takes players to say, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to talk, I'm going to share. what's interesting with Delhi is that you've got high-profile players there. The lads who've joined us for podcast, the lads who'll join us, and hopefully some of the female players who'll join us for future episodes. That people are willing to tell their stories, and that those stories are out there, and they're not actually uncommon. That these stories will be right across the game, and then of course right across wider society.
Yeah, and kudos to the people doing it. And that's not giving myself a pat on the back, but us doing this podcast being effective. Dele Alli doing that yesterday, it's powerful. And if it takes people of stature, if you like, whether that be celebrity or famous sportsman, then so be it. But I think people still look up to that kind of platform for guidance, if you like, or you still have that sort of hero status, and people look up to you and listen to you. If it's okay for him to talk, then I can talk. But yeah, there was an awful lot in there that I could resonate with. Imposter syndrome and fear of failure and vulnerability was a big one he talked about. And I mentioned in my episode about how I just didn't want to ever be in a vulnerable place, so I would tune out. And he used the word numb yesterday. He said he would be numb. So I totally understand that. But the more people that talk, the better. And if it has to come from Dele Alli or me or Claire Carlisle, then great. But eventually, hopefully, everyone talks. And like I said, I think there's a bit of a stigma to it, as in let's say the everyday people, the general people that aren't on that kind of level, still think they're okay, and it's not okay for them to talk and open up. And it is, because it's all relative. Dele Alli won't be the only person that's had a trauma that's led him to take sleeping pills. There'll be, doctors, workers, people all over society will be the same. So hopefully we can just grow. And you spoke about it earlier off air about education and what's normalised, and hopefully if we talk enough about it and we can all be, like I said, a bit kinder to each other, the next generation will know that's normal as well. Because we use the phrase it's okay to be okay, but is everybody really believing in that okay not to be okay? Sorry, is everyone believing in that? I know a lot of us are, because the work we do, but if we can get that to where it's more of a general national thing, then it'll be a lot better.
We stood about 150 yards away from where we first went for a coffee to talk about Football Untold and getting it up and running. We mentioned the figures before. Hundreds of people now have either had a conversation or now having ongoing conversations about their gambling. As a result, people who wouldn't have done it if we hadn't have had that conversation. To me, let's break the fourth wall a little bit. People listening to this, we ultimately are just normal blokes who just say, shall we try and do something and try and make a difference? When I heard hundreds of people, hundreds of calls, hundreds of email conversations, hundreds of these sort of 10-15 minute consultation, or passing on to wider services, or signposting to different. To me, that's absolutely, because it's exactly the reason we set it up, and it's exactly what we hoped, and we've kind of achieved it, in a relatively short space of time. I'm personally really proud of what we've done.
I am the same. I'm glad you've said that. I'm proud and humbled, really, as well, Mick, because it's a problem that I've had. We sat down, because we've known each other a long time, and just said, can we get that out there? Can we do it? Can we help people? And I mean, is anything better than being able to help people every day and try and make them better people? Obviously, there's the real element of there's lives at risk as well. So I'm not saying we're saving people's lives to that level, but we're helping people be a better version of themselves every day. And like I said, if everyone in society went about things that way, we would all be doing okay, because we are all flawed and we have all issues. But hugely proud of it and humbled by it from that coffee. And what's nice is that we just said we wanted to help people, and that's what it was about. The other figures I know are tremendous in terms of how many people have listened and watched and tuned in, but for me and you, it was very much about, can we help a few people along the way? Without sounding like a superhero, we've helped a few people and we'll continue to do so, and it's a nice thing to be able to do most days of my life.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.